Alright, I realized I had not made a video on the Deco BE95. I talked about it briefly, but never really got into it. I've been running it for a little while now and been pretty pleased with it overall. Um, it is a iterative upgrade over the Plume net mesh system that I've had. I've been a really ardent supporter of the Plume ecosystem for a long time, so it was one that was difficult for me to come to the realization that they're just not the company that they were, 4 or 5 years ago. And so as I have progressed and my networking has become more and more complicated, I needed something that could keep up with what I was doing. And the B95 has a lot of features in there that are fantastic, but there are still some things that the Plume system just gets right that the Deco does not. So why the Deco? And it is technically considered a Wi-Fi 7 device, but as it stands right now, Wi-Fi 7 is not fully ratified, and there's not a lot of devices out there that can use that signal. But it is a full Wi-Fi 6E functionality on the back end. And the other feature that really drew me to this product was that it has two 10 gig ports and two 2.5 gig ports on it. And this is a pain point that I had with the Plume system, was that the Plume, while relatively speedy, had an issue where, I shouldn't say had an issue, it just was not designed to really support a wired backhaul. And what that led to was the fact that I've got so much high-speed wired interconnectivity going on right now that the bottleneck was the 1 gig links on the Plume pods. And if you really fiddled with it and messed around, you could sometimes get them to boot up into the 2.5 gig mode and get that to recognize and pass data through, but it was not stable, and it would more often than not just revert back to the 1 gig. Whereas the Deco supports a 10 gig backhaul. And so what I was able to do is run, from the Oni access point into the office here, and that link there is a 10 gig link into the office. So what runs from the Oni to the office is 10 gig into the the Netgear switch from the TP-Link to the Netgear, and then that branches out into all of my devices. And so from there, I can also take a 10 gig link that I've got running up and through the ceiling that goes downstairs to the main level of the house and connects wired 10 gig to that access point down there. And what that provides is the ability for me to plug in my computer down there, the television, all of that gets its own wired connection. And so that, to me, really improves the network. Now, as this is a new product, and there are definitely teething pains that I had with it, where when I first plugged it in, it was incapable of understanding which network was the home run. And so it would oftentimes just default and lose network connectivity to the Oni when it would see other network connections and decide, oh, well, this is where my WAN should be, when in reality, that was actually just an interconnect to another system. But a couple of firmware updates happened, and a couple of, just best practices on my side were able to kind of overcome that and get that to the point where everything was working as I needed it to be. And then the other part that has been a bit of a downside is the Wi-Fi 6E connection is not as seamless as it is on the Plume. And so that's a double-edged sword. The Plume will always give you connectivity pretty much anywhere in the condo, but you're at Plume's mercy for what speed you get. Whereas the Deco, you select what speed you want, and sometimes you get coverage, sometimes you don't. And so that is just a different way of looking at it. There's no correct way there. I would love to have, Wi-Fi 6E hot coverage everywhere, but without getting more Deco units, that would be very difficult. As the walls are just too thick and too far apart to allow those signals to pass through. So what I've ended up with is a Deco going into kind of the front of the house that covers, halfway through and almost gets to this office. But everything that's in the office is pretty much hardwired, so that's not too big of an issue. The only downside there is, I like to walk and talk when I'm on the phone, and I will often, kind of walk throughout the house. And if I've selected the Wi-Fi 6E scenario, I will hit a dead zone as I walk into the office because it's just too far for the signal to pass through. Whereas the Plume would kind of magically get you from one end of the house to the other, but you would drop down in speed, and there was no way to force it back up. So you would kind of, again, at the mercy of the Plume system. But the other thing that I've done is I have left the Plume system intact, but regulated it to a separate network. So my main network exists, and then the Plume network kind of is a bridged device out of that. And so it doesn't hand out DHCP anymore. It just is regulated to extending the network coverage to places that I can't get with the Deco. And so what that means is, I've got a Ring doorbell, and that's 4 floors down. And so I've got a Plume that kind of runs halfway down into that area so that I can get coverage down there. You can technically access it from the main level, but it's spotty and doesn't work super great. So having that Plume system down there a little bit closer to it, kind of gives you that gap that was missing before. So again, this is kind of, there's not a perfect scenario, and this gets me almost the best of both worlds, where I've got the Plume network there to hit those hard to reach places, and then I've got the Deco for the fast connections. And the Deco definitely gives you those fast connections. So when everything is working right on the server side, which is a totally separate issue from the Deco system, I am capable of transferring at 1.5 gigs over the Deco wireless. and then you plug in wired and you can get the 2.5 gig, no issues. And then if you're on the, I don't really have anything that is running through the Deco directly that's 10 gigs. So in the office here, I've got devices that are 10 gig, but they're all passing through that Netgear switch. They're picking up DHCP from the Deco, but the actual pathing is going through the Netgear rather than anything else. So I'm not really passing anything faster than 2.5 gigs through the Deco system, other than the interlink in between the two main devices. So that's kind of where that's at, and I want to do a more formal review of the Deco unit. Um, the really annoying, I don't know, annoying is the right word to use here. The thing that has caught me off guard with the Deco unit is it produces a lot of heat. And so I don't agree with their fan profile. The Deco unit has a fan, and I'd say 90% of the time runs silent, as in the fan doesn't spin at all. But it kind of builds up heat, and then once it hits that threshold, the fan will kick on to an arbitrary number that I don't have any visibility into. And so you can hear it, and it'll ramp up, dissipate heat, and then turn off again. And so I would much rather that we had a constant low speed fan that kept the temperatures down, and instead of this, super silent, dead silent, ramp up, and then dead silent again. There should be kind of a happy median in there that you can run it at, or expose it to user control where I can specify what I want in that regard, so I can give it a little bit more fan speed and then, have it be a constant thing. So it's, the issue is that it's in the bedroom with me, and so I hear that as I'm trying to go to sleep, or it's just not perfect in that regard. I feel like that could be a firmware change to get that fixed to something that makes more sense. But and then the other thing is that the Deco unit is very expensive. But the plume is also very expensive. So the Deco unit, I feel like, should come with 3 stations rather than 2 for the price that you're paying. But it's kind of in a market to itself. So you've got the Orbi system that's out there that I've messed with and did not like at all. And then you've got the Plume, you've got Eero, Google Mesh, and a couple of others. But as far as high-speed interconnects, you've really got the Orbi and the Deco out there. And of the two, I've had much better luck with the Deco than I did the Orbi. The Orbi I sent back. It was just garbage. It's supposed to be amazing, super fast, and incredible, and all those things, but the Orbi just did not work on my network. So I ended up returning that one entirely. Whereas the Deco, like I said, had a few teething pains, but overall has been pretty solid. And so I just kind of wanted to make this video to be like, hey, I am using this. It is working pretty well. And I think that's the sign of a pretty good product, is that I haven't had to mess with it very much. It does one really key feature to it that the Plume didn't have and I'm getting off into the weeds here, is it does do hairpinning. Um, I've not, I have not used that feature as much as I was trying to use it with the Plume system, because I was working really hard on trying to get the website up and running with the Plume system. Whereas on Orbi, I've been working on the server itself more, so that the um, website has kind of fallen to the wayside while I've been trying to get the server back online and get all of those VMs set up again. So the the fact of the matter is that, you know, when it comes to user control, the Deco is significantly better than the opaque wall that is the Plume system. But the Plume system tends to work for more use cases where you don't need those fine grained controls. And so that's kind of where I'm going to leave it. Is there is no perfect network out there, or at least I haven't found one yet. Um, Feel free to leave in the comments if you think you've got a better network out there. I am more than willing to try it out and see, you know, if there's something that meets those perfect balances of speed, availability, and, fading into the background where I don't have to mess with it every day. I find that the Ubiquiti system has some of those key points, but not all of them. So it's still, again, I haven't found the perfect network yet. So that's kind of going to be where I'm at, and I'm going to leave this one off here.